The metallic tang of lukewarm coffee was the first sensation that registered a bitter counterpoint to the fluorescent hum of the hospital waiting room. Dr. Ramirez, bless his weary soul, had managed to procure it from a machine that looked like it predated the moon landing. I cradled the flimsy cup, the warmth doing little to penetrate the chill that had settled deep in my bones. Hours ago, a chill that had nothing to do with the overworked air conditioning. Lily, my Lily. Her small face, usually so quick to light up with a smile that could melt glaciers, was pale, her eyes wide, with a lingering confusion that tore at me more than any physical wound could have. The pediatrician, a kind woman named Dr. Evans, with gentle hands and a softer voice, had been thorough, dehydration mostly. Some minor abrasions to her esophagus, likely from the stones. Pebbles, smooth gray river-washed pebbles, nestled amongst the carefully pured chicken and sweet potato I'd packed for her lunch. The image seared itself onto the back of my eyelids every time I blinked. "She'll be fine, Mark Sarah, my wife." "My rock," whispered her voice, hoarse from unshed tears and quiet reassurances. She squeezed my hand, her fingers cold. A night of observation, some fluids. "She's strong." I nodded, unable to form words. Strong. Yes, Lily was strong. She'd faced down challenges since the day she was born, a fighter wrapped in a tiny fragile package. Cerebral palsy had tried to dictate the terms of her life, but Lily, with her indomitable spirit, had always written her own script. Slow, yes. Deliberate in her movements, in her eating, in her words when they chose to come, but never ever weak. The call had come from the community center during my weekly SVU briefing. Old Man Hemlock, who ran the Tuesday afternoon Golden Years Social Club with an iron fist and a surprisingly soft spot for the kids from the adjacent Little Sprouts daycare program, had sounded frantic. "Commander Rylance, Mark, you need to come. Now, it's Lily and Karen Miller." Karen Miller, the self-appointed queen of the Harmony Creek Homeowners Association. Her reign was one of meticulously enforced bylaws, passive-aggressive newsletters about lawn maintenance, and a general air of sniffing disapproval at anyone who dared to deviate from her narrow definition of suburban perfection. We'd had minor run-ins. A warning about the precise shade of our mailbox, apparently eggshell, was dangerously close to off-white, a clear violation of Section 3, Subsection B, Paragraph 4 of the Harmony Creek Covenant. A polite but firm suggestion that Lily's brightly colored wind chimes on the porch were visually disruptive. Minor annoyances, irritants. Nothing that prepared me for this. When I'd burst into the community center's sunny primary-colored activity room, the scene was one of frozen chaos. Toddlers stared wide-eyed and silent. Old Man Hemlock, his face flushed, was attempting to shield Lily, who was whimpering, her little hands pressed to her mouth, food smeared on her chin and bib. And Karen Miller, resplendent in a power blue tracksuit, stood with her arms crossed, a look of utter, unshakable self-righteousness on her face. Lily's specially designed ergonomic food tray, the one with the deep compartments and the weighted base, sat on the table in front of her. One compartment, the one that had held her main course, was now a shallow bed of pebbles. She was eating too slow. Karen had declared, her voice ringing with the authority of a traffic warden, issuing a particularly satisfying ticket. The other children were finished. She was holding everyone up and making a mess. This will teach her to be more considerate. The red mist that descended then was unlike anything I'd experienced even in the darkest corners of my profession. My hands had clenched a primal urge to strangle her, shake her, until her teeth rattled. It took every ounce of my training, every carefully cultivated layer of professional detachment, to keep my voice level, to move with deliberate calm. "Mr. Hemlock," I'd said, my voice a low growl. "Call 911. Tell them a child has been assaulted. Possible poisoning." Karen had scoffed. "Don't be ridiculous. It's just a few stones. A little discipline. Something her parents are clearly lacking." That was when Sarah arrived, drawn by the same frantic call from Hemlock. The sight of her, the immediate fierce protectiveness that flared in her eyes as she rushed to Lily, helped anchor me. I focused on my daughter, on getting her out of there, on getting her help. The pebbles were bagged as evidence by the first responding officer, a young patrolman whose initial bewilderment quickly turned to a stony-faced professionalism as the situation became clear. Now, in the sterile quiet of the hospital, the adrenaline had worn off, leaving behind a heavy aching rage and a profound sense of disbelief. How could anyone, how could a human being look at a child, any child, let alone one with Lily's visible challenges, and commit such a senseless, cruel act? I should have seen it, I murmured, staring at the chipped linoleum floor. The way she looked at Lily sometimes. The little comments. Mark, no. Sarah said firmly, her grip tightening. You can't blame yourself. She's unhinged. This isn't normal. This isn't HOA squabbles. This is something else. She was right, of course. My job, my life was spent dealing with the something else. The dark undercurrents of human behavior. The predators. The abusers. The ones who preyed on the vulnerable. I was Commander Mark Rylance of the Special Victims Unit. I dealt with monsters every day. I just never expected to find one filling my daughter's lunch tray with rocks in the cheerful sunlit room of our community center. A wave of nausea rolled over me. The Pebbles weren't just an act of malice. They were a deliberate attempt to harm to cause pain, nutritional sabotage, felony child abuse. The charges were already forming in my mind, clear and precise. This wasn't just a personal vendetta anymore. This was my job, and Karen Miller had just made herself my case. The next morning, after a blessedly uneventful night for Lily, who was now happily sipping juice and watching cartoons in her hospital bed, her spirit already rebounding with that incredible resilience of childhood, I walked into my precinct. The familiar smells of stale coffee, industrial cleaner, and photocopier toner usually brought a sense of purpose. Today they were overlaid with a cold personal fury. Detective Maria Ramirez. My second-in-command looked up from her desk as I approached, her dark eyes, sharp and questioning. She'd heard, of course. News, especially bad news involving one of their own, traveled fast. Commander, how's Lily? She asked, her voice carefully neutral, but laced with concern. She's okay. Shaken, but she'll be fine. They're releasing her this morning. And the Miller woman? She's about to have a very bad day, I said, my voice flat. I want a full workup. Financials, any priors? Sealed juvenile records, if we can get a judge to unseal them, though I doubt it. Complaints from previous HOAs, if she's been involved in others. Any restraining orders, civil suits. I want to know everything about Karen Miller. Ramirez nodded slowly. Personal, Commander. It became personal when she put her hands on my daughter and forced rocks down her throat, Ramirez. But the investigation will be by the book. Every I, dotted every T, crossed. She's going down for felony child abuse endangerment and anything else we can make stick. And I want to explore nutritional sabotage charges, deprivation of necessary sustenance for a vulnerable individual. Nutritional sabotage. That's a new one on me for this kind of perp. She targeted Lily's food, Maria, specifically designed food for her needs. She replaced it with indigestible objects. That's sabotage. That's an escalation beyond simple assault. Ramirez's expression hardened. Understood, Commander. We'll dig. What about the HOA? Any leverage there? Harmony Creek. I want to see their charter, their bylaws. See how much power she actually has, and how much she's just taken. I paused. And I want a uniform to accompany me when I interview her later today, for official record and witness. I don't trust myself to be alone in a room with her again without professional oversight. The admission felt like a failure, but it was the truth. The father in me was still screaming for a reckoning that the law in its measured way couldn't provide. The commander had to keep the father in check. Sarah brought Lily home mid-morning. Our house, usually filled with Lily's laughter, or the soft hum of her favorite music, felt subdued. Lily was quiet, clinging to Sarah, her eyes still holding that shadow of fear. We set her up on the sofa with her weighted blanket and a stack of her favorite tactile books. I'm going to talk to some of the neighbors, I told Sarah. See if Karen's pulled anything like this before, anything that might show a pattern. Be careful, Mark, she said, her gaze steady. She's venomous. I know. My first stop was Mr. Henderson, a retired history teacher who lived 2 doors down. He was a kind, somewhat timid man, but he'd always had a friendly wave for Lily. He was out tending his prize-winning roses, his brow furrowed in concentration. Mark, he said, straightening up, his expression immediately clouding with concern. I heard about Lily. Terrible. Just terrible. Is she... She's home. She'll be all right. Mr. Henderson, I need to ask you, has Karen Miller ever overstepped with you or with anyone else you know in the neighborhood? He hesitated, snipping a dead head from a vibrant yellow rose. Well, Karen, she's particular, very particular. There was the incident with Mrs. Rodriguez's bird bath. Said it was attracting undesirable avian elements. Made her drain it in the middle of that heat wave last summer. Poor Martha was quite upset. Her late husband made that bird bath, you know. Anything else? Anything involving children or vulnerable people? He frowned, thinking. She did make a fuss about the Granger's boy, young Timmy. He's autistic, you know, has his routines. He likes to walk the curb back and forth. Karen said it was unsettling and tried to get the HOA to pass a rule about repetitive loitering on common property. It didn't pass, thankfully. Most people saw it for what it was. Bullying, I supplied. He nodded, looking uncomfortable. Yes, I suppose so. She likes to be in control, Mark. And when she doesn't get her way, she can be quite insistent. Next, I visited Mrs. Rodriguez. She was a small bird-like woman with sad eyes. The bird bath stood empty and dusty in her otherwise immaculate garden. When I explained why I was asking, a flicker of something, anger perhaps or vindication, sparked in her eyes. That woman, she said, her voice trembling slightly. She has a cruel streak. It wasn't just the bird bath. After my Antonio passed, she complained about the state of his vegetable garden, said it was an eyesore. He loved that garden. It was his pride and joy. I tried to keep it up, but it was too much for me. She sent me 3 official warning letters, threatened fines. Did she offer any help, any community support? Mrs. Rodriguez let out a short, bitter laugh. Help from Karen Miller. No, only criticism, only rules. She looked at me, her eyes pleading. She hurt your little girl, didn't she? Really hurt her. Yes, Mrs. Rodriguez, she did. Then you stop her, Commander Rylance. Please, someone needs to stop her. The stories painted a picture, a pattern of behavior, targeting the perceived weak, the different those who couldn't or wouldn't fight back easily. It wasn't just about power. It was about a mean-spirited desire to impose her will and diminish others. Back at the precinct, Ramirez had already started compiling a dossier. No criminal priors, but a string of civil complaints from 2 previous HOAs in neighboring counties. Harassment, abuse of power, misappropriation of funds. Though that last one had been settled out of court, the records sealed. Interesting. She gets around, Ramirez commented, tapping a printout. Seems like she wears out her welcome, then moves on to a new kingdom. This time, her reign is ending permanently, I said. I'm going to pay Ms. Miller a visit. Officer Davies will accompany me. Karen Miller lived in one of the larger houses on the edge of the Harmony Creek development, a pristine 2-story colonial with an unnervingly perfect lawn. Every shrub was sculpted, every flower bed meticulously edged. It was a monument to obsessive control. Officer Davies, a young, sturdily built patrolman, stood beside me as I rang the doorbell. His presence was reassuringly official. Karen opened the door, her expression shifting from mild surprise to a tight-lipped frown when she saw me, and then to a flicker of something unreadable, annoyance, apprehension, when she registered Davies in his uniform. Commander Rylance, she said, her voice clipped. And officer, to what do I owe this official visit? Ms. Miller, we need to talk about what happened yesterday at the community center. With my daughter Lily. She waved a dismissive hand. Oh, that. A complete overreaction. I was simply trying to instill some discipline. The child was being disruptive. Disruptive. I repeated, my voice dangerously soft. By eating her lunch. A lunch specifically prepared for her dietary needs. Needs you are aware of, given your position on the HOA and your previous comments about her condition. Her eyes narrowed. My position on the HOA has nothing to do with this. This is about a child who needs to learn manners and consideration for others. Ms. Miller, you placed inedible objects, stones, into my daughter's food. She ingested some of them. She required medical attention. That's not discipline. That's assault. That's child endangerment. Officer Davies shifted his weight, his hand resting near his belt. His presence was a silent underscore to my words. Karen's composure started to crack. A flush crept up her neck. Now see here, I will not be accused of such things. It was a lesson, a harmless one. Harmless. I leaned in slightly. My daughter was terrified. She was in pain. She could have choked. She could have suffered internal injuries. We are pursuing charges of felony child abuse, Ms. Miller. And given the deliberate contamination of her food, we're also looking at nutritional sabotage. The color drained from her face. Felony. You can't be serious. This is an overreach. I'm a respected member of this community. A respected member of the community doesn't intentionally harm a disabled child. I said, my voice like ice. We have witness statements. We have the evidence. The Pebbles you so thoughtfully provided. I demand to speak to my lawyer. She stammered, her bravado crumbling. That is your right, Ms. Miller. But I want you to understand something very clearly. This isn't going away. Your actions have consequences. Severe consequences. I paused, letting the weight of my words sink in. We'll be in touch. Through your lawyer, if you prefer. We turned and walked away, leaving her standing in her doorway, her perfect facade finally showing visible cracks. Think she'll lawyer up quick? Commander Davies asked as we reached the sidewalk. Undoubtedly. But the evidence is strong. Hemlock is a solid witness. The other parents, the physical evidence. She's not going to wriggle out of this easily. The next few days were a blur of official procedures. Statements were taken, reports filed. Dr. Evans provided her medical assessment. The Pebbles were sent to the lab, not that their composition was in doubt, but for the chain of custody. I recused myself from officially leading the investigation, handing it to Ramirez to avoid any conflict of interest, but I was, of course, the primary complainant and a key witness. The HOA, however, was another matter. I attended the emergency board meeting called in the wake of the incident. Karen wasn't there, presumably on legal advice. The other board members, a flustered accountant named Barry, a perpetually anxious woman named Carol, and a retired military man, Colonel Jessup, who usually deferred to Karen, looked like deer caught in headlights. This is deeply troubling, Barry mumbled, shuffling papers. We've received complaints. Complaints, I said, keeping my voice measured. My daughter was assaulted, poisoned effectively. By your HOA president. What is the board's official response? Carol wrung her hands. We don't condone violence, of course. But Karen, she can be very persuasive, and she handles everything. Does everything include a review of the HOA's financials? I asked, letting the question hang in the air. Ramirez's preliminary dig had raised red flags about discrepancies in the landscaping budget and the community center maintenance fund, areas Karen directly controlled. Colonel Jessup cleared his throat. Commander Rylance, while this incident with your daughter is regrettable, we must follow procedure. Ms. Miller is at present still the president. Is she? I countered. Does your charter not have provisions for the removal of a board member who is engaged in criminal activity or actions that bring the HOA into disrepute? They exchanged uneasy glances. It was clear none of them had seriously considered challenging Karen before. She ruled by intimidation and by doing all the work no one else wanted to do, thereby consolidating her power. We would need to consult our bylaws, Barry stammered. Then I suggest you do so. Urgently, I said. Because the community is watching, and they're not happy. News of the Pebble incident had spread like wildfire through Harmony Creek. Whispers turned into open conversations. People who had previously been cowed by Karen, or simply apathetic, were now looking at her actions with fresh eyes colored by the vulnerability of a child. Lily, meanwhile, was slowly returning to her usual self, though she was more hesitant around strangers and visibly anxious when we neared the community center. We started therapy for her, a gentle play therapist who helped her express her fears through art and stories. Sarah and I doubled down on creating a sense of safety and love around her, a fortress against the ugliness that had touched her. The rising action was far from over. Karen, through her newly hired expensive-looking lawyer, a slick character named Marcus Thorne, began her counter-offensive. Thorne issued a statement decrying the unwarranted and slanderous accusations against his client, painting Karen as a civic-minded volunteer being persecuted for trying to maintain community standards. He hinted at a lawsuit against me for harassment and defamation. Then came the anonymous calls to Child Protective Services. Suddenly, our parenting was under scrutiny. An earnest but overworked CPS caseworker, Ms. Albright, paid us a visit. She was professional and understanding, but the process was invasive and deeply upsetting. Having to defend our love for Lily, our care, our home to a stranger, because of Karen Miller's vindictiveness, was a new low. She's trying to intimidate us to discredit me. I told Sarah, my fists clenched after Ms. Albright left, having clearly found no cause for concern. It won't work, Sarah said, her chin set stubbornly. We know the truth. Lily knows the truth. This is just desperation. But Karen wasn't done. She started a whispering campaign among the more pliable HOA members, suggesting Lily was unmanageable and that I was the one with an anger problem, using my official position to bully a well-meaning volunteer. Some bought it or pretended to. The Hendersons and Mrs. Rodriguez, however, became staunch allies, quietly sharing their own negative experiences, with Karen creating a small but growing pocket of resistance. The next HOA meeting was scheduled. Karen, emboldened by Thorne's aggressive tactics, and perhaps believing her smear campaign was working, announced she would be attending. She was going to fight to keep her position. She sent out a newsletter, a masterpiece of manipulative rhetoric, portraying herself as the victim of a personal vendetta, a champion of community values under attack. This was where the midpoint twist began to truly unfold. Ramirez's deep dive into Karen's past HOA activities had unearthed something significant. In her previous community, Bluebell Pines, Karen had been treasurer. Shortly after she'd left under a cloud, according to informal sources, a substantial sum of money was found to be missing from their reserve fund. The HOA board there, eager to avoid a scandal and protracted legal fees, had opted for a settlement where Karen repaid a portion of the money in exchange for their silence and no admission of guilt. The records were sealed, but Ramirez, through a contact who owed her a favor, got an off-the-record confirmation. She didn't just bully people, Commander Ramirez said, laying a redacted copy of the settlement summary on my desk. She was likely embezzling, small amounts cleverly disguised. Landscaping overcharges, phantom repairs for the clubhouse. Harmony Creek's books show similar patterns just starting. The Pebble incident might have been a stress reaction. Maybe you were getting too close to her little kingdom, asking too many questions indirectly by just being you. This changed things. It wasn't just about Lily anymore, as primary as that was. Karen wasn't just a neighborhood tyrant with a cruel streak. She was potentially a serial fraudster, using HOAs as her personal piggy banks. The attack on Lily might have been a desperate, impulsive act of lashing out, as her carefully constructed world felt threatened, or simply her arrogance, believing she was untouchable. "We need to get this to the current Harmony Creek board," I said. Anonymously, if necessary. They need to see who they're dealing with. We arranged for a plain envelope containing the pertinent, albeit heavily redacted details of the Bluebell Pines settlement and a summary of Ramirez's initial findings on Harmony Creek's finances to be delivered to Colonel Jessup, who seemed the most likely of the board members to act on credible information. The night of the HOA meeting, the community center hall was packed. More residents than I'd ever seen at one of these gatherings. The air was thick with tension, a mixture of anger, apprehension, and morbid curiosity. Sarah was there a few rows back, her presence a silent support. Lily was safe at home with a trusted sitter. Karen Miller swept in, flanked by her lawyer, Marcus Thorne, a smug, self-satisfied expression plastered on her face. She took her seat at the head table, radiating an aura of defiant confidence. Colonel Jessup, Barry, and Carol looked distinctly uncomfortable. The meeting started with mundane agenda items, the reading of minutes old business. Then Colonel Jessup cleared his throat. "Before we move to new business," he said, his voice unusually firm, "the board has received some disturbing information regarding President Miller's conduct in a previous homeowners association, as well as potential irregularities in our own financial records. We are initiating an independent audit effective immediately." A stunned silence fell over the room, broken by a sharp intake of breath from Karen. Thorne was on his feet instantly. "This is an outrage, an unsubstantiated attack on my client's character. We will not stand for this trial by innuendo." "Sit down, Mr. Thorne," Jessup said, his military bearing suddenly very much in evidence. "This is an HOA meeting, not a courtroom, and the information, while subject to verification, is credible enough to warrant investigation." Karen's face was a mask of fury. "This is his doing," she shrieked, pointing a trembling finger at me. "Rylance. He's poisoning you against me because of that unfortunate incident with his daughter." "Unfortunate incident." I stood up, my voice calm but carrying through the hall. "Ms. Miller, you refer to the act of deliberately placing rocks in my disabled daughter's food tray as an unfortunate incident, an incident for which you are currently facing felony child abuse charges." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Many had heard rumors, but the word felony hit with a different impact. "That is a baseless accusation," Thorne interjected. "My client acted out of concern for the child's welfare." "Concern." Mrs. Rodriguez's voice, surprisingly strong, cut through Thorne's bluster. She stood up small but resolute. Is it concern to threaten an old woman with fines because her dead husband's garden isn't tidy enough for you, Karen? Is it concern to try and stop a child with autism from walking on a public curb because it unsettles you? Mr. Henderson rose beside her. Or to complain about wind chimes or the color of a mailbox. This isn't about community standards, Karen. This is about your need to control and belittle everyone around you. One by one, other residents started to speak. A man whose dog, Karen, had repeatedly reported for excessive barking when it was simply playing in its own yard. A young mother whose stroller Karen had deemed an obstruction on the sidewalk. The grievances, small and large, tumbled out, a dam of suppressed frustration finally breaking. Karen Miller looked stunned, her face paling, as the tide of community sentiment turned visibly against her. Her carefully constructed image was shattering. This is a witch hunt, she finally managed, her voice shrill. You're all just jealous of my dedication. Dedication to what, Ms. Miller? I asked, stepping forward. To the community or to yourself? We have evidence, Ms. Miller, evidence of your actions against my daughter, and the authorities are very interested in your financial management both here and in Bluebell Pines. At the mention of Bluebell Pines, Karen's eyes widened almost comically. Thorne, for the first time, looked genuinely alarmed. He clearly hadn't been fully briefed on that particular skeleton in his client's closet. This meeting is adjourned, Thorne announced, loudly trying to grab Karen's arm. My client will not be subjected to this kangaroo court. But it was too late. The doors at the back of the hall opened and Detective Ramirez walked in, accompanied by two uniformed officers. The climax had arrived, not with a bang, but with the quiet, inexorable tread of justice. Ramirez's voice was clear and professional. Karen Miller, you are under arrest for violation of Penal Code, Section 273A, felony child abuse, and Section 384, nutritional sabotage. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. Karen stared speechless as one of the officers produced handcuffs. The smugness, the defiance, the self-righteousness, it all evaporated, leaving behind a pinched, frightened woman. Thorne sputtered about police harassment and due process, but Ramirez ignored him, her focus entirely on Karen. The sight of Karen Miller, the self-proclaimed queen of Harmony Creek, being led out of the community center in handcuffs, was met with a stunned, then slowly dawning collective silence. It was broken by a smattering of applause, which quickly grew. The falling action began almost immediately. Karen was booked, processed, and spent a night in county jail before Thorne managed to arrange bail, which the judge, having heard the preliminary details of the case and Karen's potential flight risk, given the financial irregularities, set surprisingly high. The HOA board, galvanized by Jessup and the public exposure of Karen's actions, swiftly voted to remove her as president and initiated a forensic audit of all HOA finances. Barry, the flustered accountant, actually seemed relieved to be free of her domineering presence. The community, for its part, was in turmoil, but it was a productive turmoil. Neighbors were talking, really talking, for the first time in years. Apologies were offered by those who had stayed silent, support extended to us and to others Karen had targeted. Mrs. Rodriguez found volunteers offering to help restore her husband's vegetable garden. The Granger's son, Timmy, walked his curb with a new sense of freedom, often accompanied by friendly waves. The legal case against Karen proceeded. Thorne fought every step, filing motions, requesting delays. But the evidence was damning. Lily, with the help of her therapist, was able to give a clear, albeit simple statement to a child advocacy professional, which was videotaped. Old Man Hemlock was an unshakable witness. The medical reports were unambiguous. The financial investigation ran parallel. The audit of Harmony Creek's books revealed a pattern of inflated invoices and payments to shell companies that Ramirez's team quickly linked back to Karen. The Bluebell Pines HOA, seeing Karen was finally facing legal consequences, decided to cooperate, fully providing their own evidence of her embezzlement. The district attorney bundled the charges: felony child abuse, nutritional sabotage, and multiple counts of grand larceny and embezzlement. The trial was a local sensation. Karen, under Thorne's guidance, tried to portray herself as a misunderstood, overzealous volunteer, a pillar of the community unfairly targeted. She even tried to suggest the Pebbles were accidentally swept into Lily's tray during cleaning, a desperate, laughably transparent lie that the prosecutor easily dismantled. I testified, recounting the events, focusing on the impact on Lily. Sarah's testimony was quietly powerful, a mother's pain and protective anger laid bare. Mr. Hemlock, Mrs. Rodriguez, and others from Harmony Creek painted a consistent picture of Karen's reign of petty tyranny and escalating aggression. The jury didn't take long, guilty, on all major counts. The resolution was multifaceted. At her sentencing, the judge, citing the vulnerability of her victim and the calculated cruelty of her actions, not to mention the financial crimes, gave Karen Miller a substantial prison sentence, 5 to 7 years. He also ordered restitution to Lily's therapy fund and to both HOAs she had defrauded. Her assets, including the perfectly manicured house, were to be seized to help cover the restitution. The Queen of Harmony Creek lost her castle and her crown. Harmony Creek began to heal. A new HOA board was elected, one that emphasized community and transparency. Colonel Jessup, initially reluctant, agreed to serve as interim president, guiding the transition with a newfound sense of duty. They even organized a community fair, the first in years, with a special sensory-friendly zone for children like Lily. Seeing her laugh as she played a specially adapted game, her face bright and unclouded by fear, was a balm to my soul. The resolution for our family was quieter, more personal. Lily continued her therapy, slowly regaining her trust in the world outside our home. The shadow in her eyes faded, replaced by her usual spark. The experience had changed us, certainly. It had reminded me that monsters didn't only lurk in dark alleys or anonymous online forums. Sometimes they lived next door, cloaked in respectability. But it had also shown me the strength of my daughter, the resilience of my wife, and the quiet power of a community finally finding its voice. The day Karen Miller's house was sold at auction, a new family, young and with a boisterous golden retriever, moved in. They painted the mailbox a cheerful non-regulation blue. No one complained. The wind chimes on our porch, brighter and more numerous, now tinkled merrily in the breeze, a sound of quiet defiance and reclaimed peace. The echoes of Karen's reign were fading, replaced by the murmur of a neighborhood, learning to breathe again, to connect again, to be simply harmonious. And I knew with a certainty that settled deeper than any professional satisfaction that my most important job would always be protecting the light in my daughter's eyes. That more than any courtroom victory was the truest justice.